What's up guys, my name's Alex and welcome to Lakey Wargames. In today's video we're going to be breaking down my competitive 2000 point Nighthaunt army list that follows on from the last Nighthaunt tactics, an underrated combo to win more games. So let's jump on in and see that list. Okay, so as I mentioned, today's video is going to be breaking down a new 2000 point competitive list for the new General's Handbook, the Ant Door season for Nighthaunt. As I also said, this list follows on from the last tactics video. You guys seem to absolutely love that guide and my mini combination that will help you win more games. Something that I've been personally using for a long time and have been adapting over the years and into the new General's Handbook. We now have this latest adaptation of it, and you guys really wanted to see a full list for that combination. So before we get too far into the list, if you haven't seen that video and you wish to see the combination breakdown in full, then you can find that video on my channel and I will link it in the description below. But if you've already seen it or you're just ready to get on into a competitive Nighthaunt list, then that's what we're going to do. If you haven't seen one of these breakdown videos before, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the list up on the screen in just a second. There's no real graphics or anything to follow along with. Once you've read through the list, it's just going to stay up on the screen, but I am going to read through the list in full for you, so you don't even have to do that. Once I've been through the full list, then we're going to go back through, break it down, see what's in the list, why it's in the list, and what it's going to be doing for us, and we'll go from there. If you've seen my last competitive Nighthaunt video from list breakdown from about 2 weeks ago, I want to say now, then you will notice the similarities between this list and this list today and that list from a couple of weeks ago. And the reason is that this list is based off of sort of my personal preference and how I like to play Nighthaunt, and is something I'm very comfortable with. I've been playing Nighthaunt since day one, and it kind of builds into how I like to play them on the tabletop. But in the core video, you'll see the 690 to 800 point combination core, which you can take from today and then build your own list around it. So please keep that in mind with this list. I'm going to tell you how to run it, but it is made to be piloted by my brain. So if there's things in there that you think might be better off swapping them out, then please let us know in the comments down below what you think, what you would change, and how you would perceive this kind of list. And lastly, before I get that list up, I would just like to give a massive shout out to my hobby dad. He's going to kill me for that. My good friend Kane, also known as King of Rust on Instagram. I'm going to leave his account linked down below. But this man has stood by my side since as long as I can remember doing hobby, and ever since Nighthaunt is when I met him, start of Age of Sigmar. So again, that's almost been 9 years now, and I send this man, this poor guy, so many lists all the time for all my armies, and I'm getting his opinions on them. And then what will happen is I'll send him an army list, I'll come up with a new concept like the one on today, and then I will change it half an hour later because I've thought of something else, or a different unit I could tweak, or a different artifact, or a different command trait, something small, and I'll just change it, and then I'll send him the list in full, and then be like, now what do you think? And then I will do it again and again and again, and I'll send him like 20 lists a day, and I've been doing that for 9 years. So I just wanted to give massive props to this list, because since the General's Handbook has dropped, the Reapers block, which is the one from a couple of weeks ago, was the one from the very beginning of the handbook, and I've probably sent Kane about 100 different Nighthaunt lists to get to where we are today. So thank you, Kane, for your patience and help in getting us to where we are. So with that in mind, let's jump on in and bring that list up on the screen. I'm going to read through the list for you in full, and then we're going to deep dive back into it and get going on why things are in the list. So this list is the Cursed Host of the Ferryman. Our faction is Nighthaunt, our sub-faction is the Emerald Host, and our grand strategy is Dismantle the Brave. Heroes in this list consist of Lady Olander, the Mortarch of Grief. Her spell is the Seal of Shaiish. We also have one Alrich the Drowner, who is our general. We have a Guardian of Souls, who's carrying the artifact of the Midnight Tome, and his spell is Hor Frost. We also have a Spirit Torment in this list, and he has another artifact, which is the Pendant of the Fell Wind. And our last, but not least hero in this list is a Dreadblade Harrow. We have 4 battle line options in this list. We've got 20 Chainras. We have 5 Hex Race, we have 5 more Hex Race, and we have 3 Spirit Hosts. There's 2 extra units in this list, and that is a Black Coach, and I've armed him with the Reaper Scythe, and we also have 4 Mirmorn Banshees. There's 2 endless spells coming in on this list, and that's the Mortalis Terminexus, and we also have the Suffocating Gravetide. This entire list is wrapped up within 2 battalions, and that is a Battle Regiment and a Command Entourage. That Command Entourage is magnificent, which is what is allowing us to take 2 artifacts in this list. This list comes to 2,000 points on the nose, has 0 points of allies. We've used 1 reinforcement point, which is on the unit of Chainras. There's 94 wounds in total, and it goes to 4 drops. So now that we've seen that list, let's go back through, fine comb it, and see what everything is doing. So if you've already seen the latest Nighthaunt Tactics combination video, you will already be familiar with a handful of this list. That is the Emerald Host, Lady Ollander, Aurich the Drowner, our Guardian of Souls, a Dreadblade Harrow, and the Mortalis Terminexus, all working in conjunction to basically be able to pick up a whole handful of mortal wounds and put them on any target anywhere on the table that we choose. So let's have a quick review of that just in case anyone hasn't seen it. The Emerald Host, our sub-faction, will allow us, after armies have been set up but before the first battle round begins, we get to pick D3 plus 1 different enemy units on the battlefield, and at the end of each battle round we roll a dice. On a 2+, those units are going to suffer D3 mortal wounds, and they suffer D3 plus 1 mortal wounds if they have the monster keyword. What we're looking to do with the Emerald Host is basically pick out all of the enemy's sort of key units and our priority targets that we want to kill early on. This is absolutely perfect for heroes sniping, so if you pick sort of little 5 wound heroes, which there are plentiful of in this General's Handbook because lots of people are bringing small wizards that usually don't have a ward save, and at the end of every battle round you're going to be able to hit them for a free D3 mortal wounds on a 2+. So we're already chipping them down. And because that's at the end of every round, then you've got the clock ticking on the enemy, and you're really putting pressure on them because those small heroes are going to be dying over the course of the game. The Emerald Curse isn't just great at being able to take up those small heroes, but you put it on those priority targets that you really need brought down. Say you're fighting against Ironjaws and they've got like a Maw Crusher in there, then you can put it on the Maw Crusher to be putting some nice damage in at the end of every round, so that when the rest of your list comes in to do some work, the Maw Crusher might already be bracketed down, might have already taken say 6 or 7 odd damage, and that's almost half the Maw Crusher dealt with before anything else has a chance to try and finish it off. If you're playing something like Stormcast, then this can be great into something like a unit of Protectors, or just sort of a really big beefy unit that the enemy might be using as sort of a hammer anvil and is key to their strategy of winning the game. And the Emerald Host can just be chucking free damage onto them at the end of every round. So don't just think of it as those heroes. It is great for that, but we have lots of things, as you'll see in this list, that have a potential to pop small heroes. So that's just a decision that you're going to have to make when you see the enemy army and be able to change and adapt to what priority targets you might need to bring down with that. So the next thing that we're in those key combinations is we have Lady Ollander, and the main thing that she is for in the combination is her lifting of the veil. And that is basically in the shooting phase, if she gets within 12 inches of an enemy unit, you roll a dice, and on a 2+, they suffer a number of mortal wounds equal to that dice roll. So it's basically D6 mortal wounds as long as you don't roll a 1, is the way I like to see it. Now we combo her with Aurich the Drowner, who has a command ability at the start of the movement phase. You can remove him from the table, set him up anywhere on the board that's more than 9 inches away from an enemy. Then you pick a friendly Nighthaunt unit, you remove them from the table, and they can be set up anywhere wholly within 12 inches of Aurich, as long as they are also 9 inches away from the enemy. The next little part of that combination was with the Dreadblade Harrow, which was an optional choice, but one that I really like to take, and he has an ability called the Curse of Loyalty, and that is once per battle round, if your general issues a command, this unit can issue the same command in that same phase without a command point being spent. If it does so, the command must be received by a friendly Nighthaunt unit. So the main thing is to have Aurich teleport Lady Ollander. She's going to be using that lifting the veil. Because it has a 12-inch reach, but they have to be outside of 9, then she can basically hit anyone on the table as long as they're not screened out with her veil attack for D6 mortal wounds. Again, if you're targeting those small 5 wound heroes, then you're going to be hitting them for D6. You have a chance to knock them out with just her alone. But even if she only does her average of, say, 3 mortal wounds, then at the end of the turn your Emerald Curse is going to go off from our Emerald Host sub-faction. You're going to hit them for another D3, and there you can kill a small hero outright with just spending a command point. The thing with the Dreadblade is he can copy Alrich, and he's going to be bringing our 3 Spirit Hosts, which are basically Lady Ollander's bodyguards. They basically give her another 9 wounds and a 3+ ward save, because what happens is if she gets hit by any damage and fails her armor save, then rather than take her usual 4+ ward on a 3+, she can shrug them off to the Spirit Hosts. So teleporting in is very risky, it's very dangerous. Obviously Lady Ollander is a very expensive and awesome support piece. She does a lot more than just lifting the veil for us. She can once per game heal all of our summonable units for D6 restored models, so that's absolutely amazing on returning Hex Race. You might have a unit of Hex Race down to just 1 guy, and she has a potential to heal them back up to a full 5, which is absolutely awesome. She's not terrible in a fight on her own, and she is also the War Master, so she does count as a general, even though she wasn't chosen to be the general. So she's doing a lot more than just the veil, but that is her main role in the combination. She's also a 2-cast wizard, don't forget, so she can cast Arcane Bolt. It's something I like to do, so you can use that Arcane Bolt in conjunction with lifting your veil. That goes off in the shooting phase, then the Arcane Bolt goes off at the start of any turn, so then when it's technically the charge phase, even if you're not charging with her, then you can throw out the Arcane Bolt. So she's essentially doing D6 plus 1 mortal wounds anywhere on the table, thanks to Alrich being able to teleport her, and then the Dreadblade is going to bring the Spirit Hosts over to keep her nice and protected. The next part of the combination was the Guardian of Souls, and he is carrying the artifact which is the Midnight Tome. And basically what you can do is once per game you can pop the Midnight Tome, and that allows you, if the bearer was going to cast a endless spell, instead of rolling any dice, you automatically cast the endless spell with a roll of a 12, cannot be modified in any way, but it also cannot be unbound. Now the Terminexus is a fantastic spell that has 2 different effects. Basically you get to choose whether to hasten or decrease the flow of time, and one of them heals all the units for D3 wounds within 6 inches of it. That's for reversing the time. If you choose to hasten the time, then you roll a dice for each unit within 6 inches, and on a 2+ they suffer D3 mortal wounds. So basically the Guardian of Souls is going to use his Midnight Tome sort of turn 1 to be able to throw out this Terminexus. It has an absolutely fantastic threat range because it's set up within 12, then it's able to move 8, and then obviously if you're hastening time, everyone within 6 inches is hit on a 2+ for D3 mortal wounds. So once you add in the range and it's casting and it's moving, then it basically has a threat range of 26 inches, and because you're using the Midnight Tome, there's nothing the enemy can do to unbind it. The nice thing in this General's Handbook as well is that can serve you really nicely for the battle tactic, for not having any of your spells unbound for a turn. So if you want to use that battle tactic, then basically that's the only spell you're going to be using. Don't worry about casting anything else. As nice as it would be to maybe have Seal of Shaiish up, or if you're ready to teleport turn 1, Arcane Bolt, something like that, it's just not worth it with the amount of strong anti-magic and obviously the primal dice in the game. So you can use that as an easy battle tactic on the turn that you want to throw the Terminexus across for free. Now obviously you can technically use the Midnight Tome on the Suffocating Gravetide, which was just in the list basically to use up the last 30 points. I prefer having something in the list that's concrete, and I know I've got it in my back pocket for definite, than shooting for a Triumph, because 30 points is a bit, it's a bit risky, a bit cagey. If I was maybe 50, 60 points under, then you've got more of a chance for a Triumph, but 30 points is just sort of 50-50, and Gravetide at the moment is fantastic. It has a movement of 12, and as it goes over the top of any unit, you roll a dice for every model in that unit, and they suffer a mortal wound on the roll of a 5+. So it's an absolutely fantastic anti-horde spell. If you move over a unit with 20-30 models in it, say something like Moonclan Grots, then you're going to be absolutely rolling buckets of dice and killing handfuls of models, which is something that this list struggles with. We have mortal wound, sort of range projection in sort of small focused bursts, and we can put a lot of them onto a single unit, but that's really great again at bringing down those sort of bigger things like your Maw Crushers or sniping out those small little heroes. It can absolutely dent a unit, don't get me wrong. You can choose to focus the mortal wounds wherever you want, but having Gravetide then gives you the option to be able to, on sort of turn 2, turn 3, you can use your focused mortal wounds to bring down heroes, and then you can throw the Gravetide over the top of an enemy unit, and then obviously you've got all your charging and damage coming in from elsewhere. But the Midnight Tome is basically there to be able to throw out that Terminexus, 26-inch threat range on that turn 1, so you're going to hit someone with a Terminexus for a 2+, they suffer D3 mortal wounds. Then don't forget at the end of the battle round, the Emerald Host is going to kick in on a 2+, so you have a chance to basically snipe out an enemy hero that's 26 inches away from your Guardian of Souls. Turn 1 between the Emerald Curse and the Terminexus, and well, unless you're rolling 1s, then there's nothing that the enemy can do to stop you. Now, that was the sort of the main gist of the combination. Like I said, there is a full video that will break that down in slightly more depth. I didn't want to spend too long on it, but yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. Is to be able to put the Terminexus is D3, the Emerald Host's got another D3, Lady Ollander can do D6+1, and you can basically put that anywhere on the board through the Midnight Tome and Outwitch's Teleport. There's nothing that they can do to stop you. Now, obviously, you don't want to be turn 1 teleporting Lady Ollander straight into the enemy lines because, well, they also have 2,000 points of models on the table, and as cool as Lady Ollander is with 3 Spirit Hosts at her side, she isn't invincible. So what I like to do is that tactic is something that you have in your back pocket, and you're going to unleash that turn sort of 2, turn 3. Now the Terminexus you can throw out turn 1, like I said, it's got fantastic range on it. You can use the Midnight Tome, you can score your battle tactic, and hopefully if the Emerald Curse does enough damage as well, you can even take out a small hero from across the table early doors, and that was fantastic. Worst case scenario, the Emerald Curse will hopefully go off, do some chip damage here and there. The Terminexus doing the same thing because it's in that 6-inch AoE. Depending how your opponent is set up, if they've castled, put lots of units together with small support heroes in range, and you don't kill anyone, then hopefully, worst case scenario, you're going to do a few mortal wounds here and there to a handful of units and start getting enemy units sort of down and whittled a little bit before we get into the thick of the fighting. This list is mainly, like I said, for turn 2, turn 3, so we're going to really slow play the first turn. I don't mind giving up ground and objectives sort of turn 1, maybe I'll capture 1 or 2 points on the table, whether I'm going first or second. Obviously, depending on what you're fighting, if you're fighting something like Iron Jaws or Khorne, then you know that you're going to get charged, they're going to come screaming across the table at you, but I'm not too worried about taking that step back turn 1, because we're Nighthaunt, because we're Ethereal, we've got that retreat and charge. Unless I know they've got something that specifically shuts down the ability to retreat, then I know that I'm not going to get locked in. They're not going to be able to box me anywhere, because if they charge me, then I can just sort of fly up over the top, go where I need to go, reposition my units. Something charged Hexwraith that I didn't want it to, and I want to bog it down with Chainras, then I'll just retreat the Hexwraith out, put them where I want, bring the Chainras over, put them in, that kind of thing. So what I'm going to do is slow play the turn 1, shuffle up, get myself positioned, take an objective or 2 where I can, but basically just stay sort of where I want to stay and really wait for that turn 2. The reason for that is because after you've moved and after they've moved, we've got 2 units of 5 Hexwraiths and a Black Coach who all do mortal wound impact hits. So after they've finished a charge move, you roll a dice, again on a 2+, they take D3 more mortal wounds. Obviously we've got Terminexus going off, we've got the Emerald Curse from the Emerald Host sub-faction going off, so we have D3 mortal wounds on a 2+ in absolute spades. Giving up that ground turn 1 will really allow you turn 2 to be able to pick your fights with those fast moving units. The Coach moves 10, the Hexwraiths are moving 12, so you can basically get them anywhere that you want to go. And the reason is the 20 Chainras blob is going to go onto a sort of a key objective. They've got a weight of numbers. That's obviously the most numerous thing I have in this list. So they're going for the objective that I need to contest hotly the most. A unit of Hexwraiths and a Black Coach will usually stick together and try and fight it out on one flank for an objective. I like to try and put 5 Hexwraiths and the Coach on the side of the table or into an area where I know that Lady Ollander is going to teleport, because then what I'm doing is I'm asking my opponent lots of questions, sort of turn 2, turn 3, we've already whittled them down with a few mortal wounds. Then all of a sudden 5 Hex Wraiths and a Black Coach come screaming along the table, Lady Ollander's teleported into their backlines, and that's a lot of things to deal with in one go. Of course, like I said, once you make that teleport, you're going to use the combination from before, so Lady Ollander is going to absolutely throw out a ton of mortal wounds. Hopefully you've got Terminexes off again. We know obviously once the Midnight Tome is popped, casting in this General's Handbook is sometimes tough, but that's just one of the things that we're going to be having to make the choice of. Lady Ollander being a 2-cast wizard is great because then she can use Terminexus, and then she can also use Arcane Bolt, and that will leave your Guardian of Souls free to use something like Hor Frost or his War Scroll spell to return D6 slain summonable models. So let's move away from that combination just a little bit. We know that we can pop that, we know that we have this board-wide awesome teleport, we've got fast-moving retreat and charge units that deal yet more mortal wounds on the charge, and we can bully people out from those sort of positions. Now the 20 Chainras are something that I would have liked to have had something a bit stronger in that pocket. My list from a couple of weeks ago, we did something similar, but we had 20 Grimghast Reapers. Obviously the Reapers have one better save, which means that they're ignoring things 50% of the time, whereas Chainras only have that 5+ save, so they're only ignoring sort of a third of the damage that comes into them. But to be honest, I think Chainras are a little bit underrated. A lot of people seem to just go into them and expect them to do nothing, but 2 attacks each on 25mm basis, so they're still fighting in 2 ranks. Obviously we can do we've got the Frightful Touch, so any 6s to hit automatically wound the target, and you're just going to be trying to outlast the enemy, whittle them down, do some chip damage here and there. But the Hex Race, the Coach, and Lady Ollander teleporting around with your spells are going to be the main cause of damage. But the Chainras are just sort of a threat of you're asking your opponent, can you remove these 20 ethereal guys who are just going to be sitting on an objective and just sort of waving at you and asking you more questions. Now 20 Chainras on their own aren't the toughest, and that is where Mr. Spirit Torment comes in. Spirit Torments are absolutely awesome. They're one of the best healers in the Nighthaunt book, in my opinion, because they go off at the end of every combat phase. You pick a Nighthaunt summonable unit wholly within 12 inches, and you can heal up to 3 wounds, or if there's no wounds allocated to it, you return a number of slain models that have a combined wounds characteristic of 3 or less. So basically with our Chainras, that translates into at the end of every combat phase you bring 3 Chainras back to life. The main thing I find with Chainras is they're only Bravery 8, so you do usually have to save a CP to Inspiring Presence them because they are not immune to Battle Shock, and you will lose these guys sort of in little handfuls at a time if you're not careful, so just make sure you're really careful with the Battle Shock there. But that Spirit Torment is going to be able to bring 3 of them back at the end of every turn, and we've snuck in the artifact which is the Pendant of the Fell Wind, which is a really underrated artifact in my opinion. The Spirit Torment's attacks have a range of 2 inches, so he can fight over the front rank of Chainras from behind, so if you're stuck into something that's only got a 1-inch reach, then you can hit them with the Spirit Torment and not be hit back. And the Pendant of the Fell Wind is an artifact that if any enemy units get within 3 inches of him, they are -1 to all wound rolls. So that innately is going to make your 20 Chainras and the Spirit Torment a lot tankier, because not only are now you a 5+ ethereal, obviously you have a 6+ ward save from being undead. You can use something like a Discorporate if you've got the spare CP to be able to give yourself a 5+ ward save, but now you have that nice -1 wound on top of that. And the Guardian of Souls is generally floating around with these Chainras as well, so he has the choice of the spell to bring back D6 more slain models. So as long as basically you've only got the 1 Chainras alive, you can essentially get D6 back from the Guardian of Souls. You know you're getting 3 back at the end of the combat, again as long as you survive, from the Spirit Torment. And Lady Ollander can return D6 once per game board wide, so we do have an ability to bring these Chainras back if it doesn't go too well, but we do have their tankiness boosted up a little bit, and a lot of people will underestimate that sort of thing once they're -1 to wound between your ethereal and your ward saves there. Now that leads into why I've taken Hor Frost on the Guardian of Souls, and that is what turns those Chainras into a slightly annoying sort of prod in the side, into something that can be absolutely scary. Hor Frost, we're basically going to be using it not to change the hit or wound characteristic, but just the rend. As we know, Chainras are 2 attacks, hitting on 4s, wounding on 4s, with no rend 1 damage. Hor Frost is, if we get it off, it's a casting value of 8. We can use primal dice on that, so we can try and cast it 3d6 if we wanted to. And you roll a d3, and you change the characteristic to match what you rolled for the d3. So basically you can have your Chainras up to rend 3, and like I said, 2 attacks each. They're fighting in 2 ranks because they're only on 25mm bases, so even with that 1-inch reach they can reach over the top of each other. You can get a lot of attacks in, and at rend 3, even 4s and 4s, which is actually going to be 4s and 3s because the Guardian of Souls has his little bubble of +1 wound. You can do a surprising amount of damage. Obviously you're going to have to read the game, decide whether you want that Hor Frost to go off or whether you want to use Spectral Lore to return dead models, or maybe you need one of the endless spells off. Lady O has to cast something somewhere else. But yeah, we've got Hor Frost in that back pocket, so if the Chainras want to go on the offensive, or if they're hotly contesting an objective and you just need extra damage, then you have Hor Frost there to be able to take those Chainras from a annoying defensible unit into something quite scary. This is also the reason I've given Lady Ollander Seal of Shaiish, and that is for the early game. She's usually going to be deployed sort of in and amongst everything's going to be together, bar the Hex Race, who are obviously fast enough to do their own thing, but that's the spell that will give them a 5+ ward save, so we don't have to use the CP for Discorporate, and she can give them a nice 5+ ward, or she can cast it on Hex Race, then they can move up and act as a screen. It just gives you that sort of defensive option in your opening turns. So we've spoke a little bit about everything there. The Hex Race are just going to sort of go around and cap objectives. They're going to retreat and charge in and out of everything. Basically be the support where you need it, and they just act as fast moving screens and aid to sort of if you need something to go in to help the Chainras, or like I said, that turn 2, turn 3, when Ollander is going to teleport somewhere on the, onto the table, the Hex Race are going to be charging the units around there, so Ollander can be busy dealing with whatever she wants to mortal wound damage down, and the Hex Race can tie up some threats nearby. We also have a black coach in this list, and I've given him the Reaper Scythe just to make him a bit more sort of offensively scary. I have been toying up with the idea of giving him the Soul Reach Grasp, and the reason for that is because then he can power up his Evocation of Death, which is basically when he's set up for the first time, you put a dice next to him with the 1 facing up. Anytime an enemy model is slain or flees within 12 inches of the coach, you increase the value of that dice by 1 to a maximum of 6, and once that value is a 5 or a 6, the coach gains a 4+ ward save, and then instead of keeping that, you can once per game remove the dice, put it back down to a 1, pick an enemy unit within 12 inches, you roll a dice, and on a 2+, they suffer 3d3 mortal wounds, which is absolutely awesome once you combine it with the combination we talked about at the start of the game, Lady Ollander's Teleport, the Terminexus, the Emerald Host, etc, etc. And the thing that makes this really, really nice is the fact that he has the Nimbus of Power ability, which basically is a built-in self-teleport. So he can do what Owlwich does, can't take anyone with him, he just teleports himself. But once you have that evocation sort of powered up, then he can teleport, and if you combine him with Lady Ollander onto a target, then they're taking d6 mortal wounds from her veil essentially. Then if you've used Arcane Bolt, that's another mortal wound, so you're doing d6 plus 1 mortal wounds from Ollander, and then the coach can do 3d3 mortal wounds. You put those in conjunction together on a target that's being affected by the Emerald Curse, and you can do a lot of damage. Powering up the coach is usually something quite easy to do if you're careful with it. Again, because we're playing KG in the first turns, you combined it with something like a unit of 5 Hex Wraiths, you charge into something quite squishy, a lot of 1 wound sort of enemy targets. Obviously the coach is going to do d3 mortal wounds on the impact hits, then the Hex Wraiths are going to do the same, so you should score a couple of kills from that nicely, and then between the Scythe and the Hex Wraith attacks, you should, as long as you've picked the right target, be able to power the coach up in 1 turn. Then come that turn 3 is when you can teleport the coach somewhere and nuke it for mortal wounds. Obviously Ollander can do the same thing thanks to Owlwich, and then your Chainras are just going to be sitting on an objective and hopefully not have died by yet. The last little thing that's in this list is our Mirmorn Banshees, and they are helpful for that early game into armies that are scary with spells from range. Obviously the Mirmorn Banshees are absolutely fantastic in this General's Handbook with all the magic that's going around. They're going to be using their Spell Eater's ability, so anytime that a wizard successfully casts a spell and it affects a unit wholly within 12 inches of the Banshees, then you get to roll 2d6, adding 1 to the dice roll if there's 3 or more Banshees in the unit, and if that roll is greater than the casting value, so they are there just to blanket cover sort of Olander, the Spirit Hosts, and your other heroes like Alrich in the early game, so they don't get hit across the table by enemy sort of mortal wound damage magic, because obviously everything in Nighthaunt is a little bit fragile. And that is their whole thing, sort of that turn 1, turn 2 when you're being cagey and you're really setting up everything, getting ready to go before you pull the trigger and teleport across the table. They are there just to eat the spells and hopefully keep everyone alive, so you can play that early game out a bit slower, and then when you decide to pull the trigger on the teleport, you've got the coach on Olander just flying around doing crazy things everywhere. So that is the list and the breakdown there for you guys. I hope you guys have really enjoyed it. I was absolutely overwhelmed by the positive response from the last Nighthaunt tactics for the combination, and this is the list that I have personally built around it, and it's the list that's based off of all the ones I've had most success with, and I think this is probably one of my favourite Nighthaunt lists to play to date. It reminds me a lot of the old book where you used to be able to teleport the general. You used to make the Dreadblade harrow your general because the general could bring a unit with teleport a unit across the table to the general, but the Dreadblade also had his discorporation ability, so he can teleport himself, so you could like teleport the Dreadblade first and then use a CP to bring a unit. Basically Alrich is that now, and thanks to the Dreadblade we are double teleporting. You can use those two in other ways as well. They're not just there to teleport Lady Olander to be able to deliver that damage. That is one of the main things that this is built around. But if your Chainras are in real trouble, and like I said there's only 1-2 of them left alive, you can teleport the Chainras out, or offensively at the start of the game if you really want to cap an objective, and then because the Dreadblade is there and he can copy the command for free, you can bring the Spirit Torment Guardian of Souls, whoever you want to go with them, and keep a support hero with the Chainras. Again, same for Hex Race. If you want to get them out of dodge and a retreat isn't going to be far enough for you, then you can just teleport anyone anywhere away. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you have enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed making these kind of videos for you. Let me know your thoughts on this list down below. Is this something that you would play, or would you play something very similar to this? But as always, guys, stay safe. Happy wargaming. Psst. Hey you! Did you know that Lakey Wargames now has an official eBay store? You can buy yourself all kinds of pre-painted and new on sprue hobby goodness and support the channel at the same time. There's a link in the description below if you want to check it out. I'd greatly appreciate it, and it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Okay, see you in the next one.